the top of the distribution. Even the individual income tax cuts were really skewed toward the top because you're bringing down every bracket for someone who's well off, but just affecting, in a very small sense, those who are lower in the income distribution who might have only got a couple $100 of tax cuts. You combine that with tariffs, which are paid by U.S. households and are very regressive in the sense that poor households pay a much higher fraction of their income in tariffs as richer households do because they consume a lot more traded goods as a fraction of their income. So if you look at that pattern, I would view this sort of nationalist rhetoric as really a smoke and mirrors. You're sort of telling the public one thing, that you're on their side, but at the same time, your tax policies are reverse Robin Hood. You're taking from those at the bottom to give to those at the top. And that's exactly what their platform tax policies would do.
Interesting. Kimberly, do you have a baseline assumption as to what happens in Congress and the balance of power there? There are some expectations that we could see divided government. What are the implications then for the policy platform, regardless of who's in the White House?
Yeah, I think this is a political situation that's very much in flux, as you know that things have even changing today, of course, with respect to the White House race. The House is more expected to be Democratic compared to the Senate, where the map is tougher for Democrats. If government is split at all, I would expect much more modest changes in policy than if there's either a Democratic trifecta or a Republican trifecta. But I think there would also be large differences between those two trifectas. But in a split government case, I think we're looking at some modest extensions to Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, a little more deficit awareness than we would have if the Republicans run the table. They've indicated that they're going to do unfunded tax cuts and expand the deficit. And I think that's somewhat problematic given the deficit point that we're starting out with, where we're looking at a forecast that even assuming no Tax Cuts and Jobs Act extensions, the forecast has a 6% of GDP budget deficit over the next decade, with debt rising to about 120% of GDP. Add on tax cut extensions, and debt relative to GDP would grow much more steeply. So I think in a divided Congress, they would be cognizant of these pressures and less likely to run up the budget deficit than they would in a Republican context, where they've indicated that tax cuts are their prime objective and they care much less about the deficit.
Then, of course, there's the big question which remains. So where is the Fed in all of this, and to what degree are the politics on November the 5th a big test of the central bank's independence? Kimberly, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us with that analysis. Thank you. Kimberly Clausing there from PIIE. We'll take another quick break here on the programme. We'll leave you with a look at the biggest gainers on the Nikkei this morning. The index is down 1%. Early Asia trade. More market action when we return 2 minutes.
You're confident you can beat Mario in terms of popularity? It is the company behind the iconic Sonic the Hedgehog. On the next Managing Asia, I'm at Sega Sammy Group's headquarters in Tokyo, Japan, to speak with CEO Haruki Satomi.
Our vision is to bringing our video game to 3 billion gamers in the world.
Catch more of my exclusive interview on the next Managing Asia.
Need money for college, down payment for a house, a nest egg? I started the club for you. The Investing Club is about allowing you to be in control of your own money. We do something nobody else does. We tell you what we're going to do before we do it. We're not traders. We're about creating long-term value. You want to be a better investor? Join the club.
Get invested. Join the club today. Go to cnbc.com/Kramer.
Welcome back Monday on Talk Asia. We've got Asian markets under pressure this morning. Tokyo is down in excess of 1%. Sydney is down about 3/4. The Korean market is down 1 1/3. Let's break it down and start with the early action up in Seoul. Sherry Kang on the case. Good morning.
Good morning, Martin. Good morning, everybody. So we start things off choppy, and then the negativity is growing quite a bit. So we've got foreign as well as institutions are selling, and we've got the Kospi now sitting lower by more than 1% at the moment. And really, the victims of this Monday trade is the chip stocks as well as the battery names, and a lot of questions around, of course, what happens with the CHIPS Act as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. Remember, the Samsungs and LGs and Hyundais, they invested heavily in the United States when it comes to really this building out this strategic alliance between the U.S. and South Korea, and of course the supply chains as well. So we've got SK Hynix for one, and LG Energy Solution. They are in deep pain trade at the moment, giving up more than 3% at the moment. And of course, it would mean continuation of a status quo if we do get a Harris presidency, but of course lots of questions around that prospect at this point. So that's how the market is processing Biden's withdrawal from November election. What about some of the Trump trades that we saw about a week ago, and of course pretty much all of last week? What about defense stocks, for example, that is really unique to South Korea in terms of Trump victory trades? Some of that is actually coming off a little bit, but we've got, of course, the defense stocks now in negative territory across the board. But of course, we've got Bitcoin sitting above 68,000 Shri, and we've got South Korea crypto stocks tracking that move on this Monday morning. Back to you.
Sherry, thank you very much indeed for that. Excellent points about the negativity in our regional markets and the pressure from the chip makers, which at this point in time, let's take a look at the US equities picture, see if that is influencing and pulling it down. It doesn't really seem to be. Seems to be steady at this point in time, and investors really trying to figure out what this evolving political landscape in the United States really means for the Trump trade and rotation. We'll keep tracking the developments in DC throughout the morning for you and see how it plays out and the rest of the market opens here in our region. Street Science is coming up next.
Today's Most Active Stocks Update is sponsored by Interactive Brokers. 150 markets, 33 countries, 26 currencies. Today's Most Active Stocks Update was sponsored by Interactive Brokers. Trade worldwide from a single unified platform.
I'm Christian Thrain. I head up marketing for BT's consumer business. There's so much development going on in our industry with competition, with opportunities for driving new revenue, risk of disruption and change of customer behavior, and how do we play into that? We started out with looking at what is our vision going to be, what's the role we're going to play. I think it's increasingly about being more relevant in your communication and then find genuine insights that you can play to and then amplify it more specifically in your paid media, but also in your own media. It's a combination of thinking about the audiences first and then think of how are you relevant, where do you reach them, and come across as a relevant, genuine brand that has a voice. We see opportunities, we talk about opportunities, we see products, journeys that we can change, we see communication that will be different. What is interesting is that you get to those insights because you talk about audiences.
Breaking news, market moves. Scott Wapner from the NYSE. Closing bell, CNBC.
You want people to trust their money.
This is the market that we're operating in. They need to drive their plans forward.
We need to pursue new business opportunities.
You're always better off having a fortress balance sheet.
Prudent fiscal policy can contain debt.
You're going to take less risk to get to your target now more than ever before.
Making sense of the global economy. CNBC.
For as long as I can remember, I have always considered myself pretty ambitious. I always wanted to be a television journalist. When I started out covering foreign exchange, I actually taught myself how to trade currencies because I wanted to understand what people wanted to know. My grandfather, who was a Holocaust survivor, inspires me every single day. And growing up, he always used to have CNBC on in the background. Every day is fun covering business news. Every day is different. It is never boring.
Good morning from Singapore. You're watching Street Science. I'm Tanveer Gill with Sam Badass at the SGX. Let's get to your headlines this hour then. Joe Biden bows out. The U.S. president is withdrawing his re-election bid and throwing his weight behind his VP, Vice President Kamala Harris, as a potential Democratic nominee. U.S. equity futures are modestly higher following Biden's announcement, but earnings also a dominant theme this week, as well as central bank policy with the Fed's preferred gauge of inflation, the PCE, due out on Friday.
And China's central bank trims the 7-day reverse repo rate by 10 basis points this morning, calling it part of its efforts to improve open market operations and better support the real economy. As we mentioned, investors in this part of the world waking up to that big news this morning, Biden dropping out of his re-election bid and endorsing VP Kamala Harris. So we are watching to see how the markets are going to be reacting to this today. So far, they are exercising a degree of caution. We have got most markets, all markets in the red this morning, in the vicinity of down almost 2% so far as we have got underway this morning. We've got the Straits Times just really teetering around that flat line at the moment. But a few markets to point out. We've got the Nikkei 225 down around over 1%, as you can see here, and the Topics doing a similar thing. The Kospi is also about in line with that sentiment. So we are, of course, gauging the reaction as to what sort of uncertainty this now injects into the markets. As Tanveer mentioned in those headlines, we've got a lot of event risk on the horizon. We are watching earnings and, of course, central banks as well, Tanveer, as we have, of course, had China cutting one of those interest rates this morning. We do have Chinese markets coming online at the bottom of the hour. We'll be gauging reaction to that, and also this official document that has come out as we got the third plenum communique and the press conference. We'll be digging into that a little bit in the program.
So lots to cover this Monday morning, Sam. Let's straight get out to the markets, reacting to a seismic shift in the race for the White House. 106 days before Election Day, and President Joe Biden has stood down from his re-election campaign. The president fully endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee for president. Biden saying his decision was in the best interest of the country and comes after former President Donald Trump has taken a lead in many opinion polls, although this lead remains within the margin of error. U.S. futures are suggesting a positive start, so just want to ad-lib that for our viewers, just want to mark that for our viewers, because we are looking at a higher open for the benchmark indices, all the three major averages looking up. Not a whole lot, but suffice to say that 12 hours from now, we will see a higher open for the markets there. CNBC's Emily Wilkins joins us with the latest from Washington, D.C. on this story. Emily, wonderful to have you. What can we expect as the next steps in this story?
So this is very uncharted territory right now for U.S. politics, and it's not quite clear exactly what that next step is going to be. What was supposed to happen is that the Democrats were supposed to do a virtual roll call ahead of the meeting in Chicago around mid-August to formally nominate Biden as their nominee. But of course, that's not going to happen anymore. And right now, Kamala Harris, his vice president, just has a ton of momentum. You have seen dozens and dozens of Democrats come out and say they will support her. You have seen other individuals who we thought could potentially put their hat into the race should Biden drop out, come forward and say, you know what, we support Kamala Harris and she has our backing. And so I think at this point, it's going to take a couple more days to play out to think exactly where things are. I have heard from some Democratic strategists as well as lawmakers who have said, look, we need to have an open process. We need to allow folks to throw their hat in the ring if they want to potentially run. But of course, if no one throws their hat in the ring, then Kamala Harris is kind of on a glide path at this point to the nomination. It's also important to note the fundraising that we are seeing come in. I mean, just in the first 5 hours since Harris announced that she would accept and would be running for president, she raised more than $27 million. That was as much as Biden raised the entire day after his debate, and you are still seeing more and more small dollar donations pour in. Plus, we know there's a lot of interest from big donors as well. So I think this is going to certainly be something that plays out over the next couple weeks as Democrats figure out what to do. But at this point, it does seem increasingly likely that Kamala Harris will wind up being the Democrats' nominee and go up against Trump for the November elections.
So, Emily, very good morning. Good evening your time. Sam here. Is there anything you're hearing about what or who is potentially emerging as perhaps the VP nomination?
I mean, it's a great question, Sam. Normally what happens for a lot of these vice president picks is that they try to get someone who's a little bit different than the nominee. So if it is Kamala Harris, you have someone who is from California. She has a prosecutor background, obviously would be the first black woman president, and first also as well as Asian woman president. And so you'd probably be looking for a vice president who doesn't share some of those traits. So you could have someone like Josh Shapiro, the current governor of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a swing state, very key to win. That could help Democrats lock that state down. You also have Governor Roy Cooper of North Carolina, another potential swing state that Democrats could win. And Cooper obviously is a Democrat who knows how to do it. Both of them have thrown their support behind Kamala Harris at this point. Of course, they could also pick Gretchen Whitmer, who is the governor of Michigan, another key swing state. Pete Buttigieg, who of course has his roots in the Midwest, has some military service. And Gavin Newsom was often floated as a potential candidate, although it would be hard to see two people on the same ticket from the same state. That could cause a few problems. But certainly at this point, they actually have to figure out what their process is going to be for the nominee, if this is going to be an open process, and if anyone else is going to wind up trying to challenge Kamala Harris.
Indeed, there's a race within a race running in within the Democratic Party. Thanks very much, Emily, for joining us and giving us your take and the update on this story. Stephen Okun is senior advisor at McClatchy Associates and a Democrat who previously served under the Clinton administration. He joins us around the desk to make sense of it all, because it has been a lot over the course of the last 24 hours, Stephen. Lovely to have you in the show. Thank you very much for your time. What do you make of the story right now, and what are the chances that Kamala Harris would emerge as a potential nominee from the Democratic Party for the presidential race?
Well, first, I would say Democrats are, generally speaking, euphoric. As a whole, the Democratic Party thought Joe Biden did a very good job in his first term, did a historic job in some ways in his first term, but that he wasn't capable of serving out a second term. And so the Democrats are thrilled with Joe Biden's decision, honor his service, and now look forward. And the question is, will it be the vice president who becomes the nominee? It certainly seems to be that case. That's the direction the party is headed. However, regardless that President Biden endorsed Vice President Harris, the convention's open. The delegates can do what they want to do. Most of them are loyal to President Biden. Presumably that loyalty will transfer, but we're in uncharted territory.
When it comes to national polling, and I was just looking at some numbers out here put out by our sister concern NBC News, the Vice President's numbers, Kamala Harris's numbers against Trump have been quite similar to Biden's in several recent national surveys, and in some cases a notch higher.
Look, 2016 was an election that was decided by less than 100,000 votes. 2020 was an election that was decided by less than 100,000 votes over a few states. 2024 is shaping up to be that way. Now, President Biden was really falling behind, former President Trump because of his age, because of the doubts of whether he could do the job going forward. And people, if they were going to focus on that, meant the Democrats were going to lose. Kamala Harris is a total reset. We go back to the beginning of a divided country that's 50-50, and that's where we stand right now, and that's where the polls are right now.
What can she do? What states can she get? What constituencies could she appeal to that Biden couldn't?
Well, I mean, look, she's going to appeal to the same states that he appealed to in 2020. The question was, could he appeal to them in 2024? The focus is going to be on what is referred to as the blue wall. Now, it's the former blue wall, but it's that blue wall that includes the upper Midwest. It's Michigan, it's Wisconsin, and it's Pennsylvania. If Vice President Harris, as the nominee, can hold those three states, and she could lose even some of the states that President Biden won, like Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada, and she still wins in November. So the focus is going to be there, and she should be at least as good as President Biden in trying to do that.
And I was just asking Emily, as you heard there, I mean, who could emerge as perhaps the likely frontrunner here as the VP on the ticket? I mean, who are you looking at as far as candidates are concerned when you look at a Shapiro or Whitner?
Well, the two that are most named is Governor Shapiro from Pennsylvania, and it's Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona. Now, full disclosure, I am very good friends with Mark, and we've been friends for 20 years, so I'm totally in the bag for him. But that said, what do those two bring? There's two swing states, Arizona and Pennsylvania, so you have geographic diversity. They are seen as more moderate than the vice president, so they can help appeal to what you need to win if you're a Democrat, and it's those independent, typically suburban women voters in those key swing states. Senator Kelly presumably can do that. Governor Shapiro presumably can do that. So those would seem to be the front runners. There's a bunch of other names that'll come up, but I'd focus on those two.
And Harris hasn't wasted any time in getting down to business. I believe that she has gone and called the Hispanic community, the black community, as part of her Reach Out campaign. But what more does she need to do here? Because arguably the fact that sort of Biden kicked the can down the road has posed a risk to this campaign with just a month until the DNC and 100 odd days until the election now.
Well, things are really close to going one of two ways for the Democrats. If the Democrats can be unified, come out of this convention speaking with one voice, energized, excited, then they have a good chance to win in November. If it is disunity coming out of this convention, if there are fights between the moderates and the liberals and the progressives, and there's bad feelings come out of this and people aren't energized and stay home, the Democrats are going to lose. When Democrats are disunified, that's when they get into trouble. And you can look back at 1980 and 1968 as two examples of elections that the Democrats lost where they were disunified. And the Republicans, thanks in part to a purge of those who disagree with Donald Trump, are totally unified right now, and they're totally behind their candidate. The Democrats have to do that. Unknown if they'll be able to do that yet.
Abortion, right? How much of that could be a swing factor? Because in his nomination speech, Donald Trump steered clear of his abortion policy because it's controversial. That's what happened with J.D. Vance as well. And so being very outspoken on this issue, does Kamala Harris have an edge?
100% she has an edge. Look, if the issues that voters are thinking about right now, the Democrats are behind. They're behind on the economy. They're behind on inflation. They're behind on immigration. And if the election is about those things, the Democrats are going to lose. So who's ever at the top of the ticket, presumably Vice President Harris, the narrative has to shift to where the Democrats have strength. The Democrats have strength in two areas. One, Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is as unpopular, or almost as unpopular as Joe Biden was. And so you want to focus on Donald Trump, and you certainly want to focus on reproductive freedoms. The Democrats have outperformed every election since the Supreme Court took away women's reproductive freedoms, took away that constitutional right that had been there since Roe v. Wade. If the Democrats can focus on that, get those independent and especially suburban women in those swing states to come out on that single issue. And there are a lot of single issue voters on reproductive freedoms right now. That's their best and in some ways only chance to win.
Right. Finally, Donald Trump has been making some remarks. He's called Joe Biden the worst president in history. He's saying that Kamala Harris would be easier to beat. Is he being overconfident or realistic in terms of just the kind of momentum that's gathering behind him?
Oh, like Trump is being Trump.
Trump is being Trump, actually.
He's being Trump. And to now, I think the Republicans are making a mistake to say this is a coup in the Democratic Party. I think the Republicans are making a mistake to say that President Biden should resign immediately. The Republicans have a lot to run on. They should be focused on those things that they have a strength in right now. Inflation, the economy, and immigration. If they want to make this petty and about and put the issue into that kind of petty politics, like when you had Joe Biden and Donald Trump debating their golf game, right, in the last debate, which turned Americans off, it's going to turn Americans off now. They need to focus on their issues.
Got it. And we'll be watching. Thank you so much for your help this morning, Stephen, reacting to that so quickly for us. Steve Oken of McClarty's Associates joining us here in the studio. We'll take it back to this part of the world as Asia's trading week gets nicely warmed up. Street Signs will be back in a few minutes. Stay with us.
On a $100,000 US dollar margin loan, Interactive Brokers charges just 6.83%. Do you know how much your broker charges? Fidelity and Schwab charge over 1.5 times as much. E-Trade and TD Ameritrade are even higher. Move your account to Interactive Brokers and save at least $5,200, or much more if you're trading big bucks.
Tiny homes.
Welcome to my tiny house in Atlanta, Georgia.
One woman makes big money with a very little house.
Pretty spacious, honestly.
Plus the Big Apple's version of living little.
My 95 square foot New York City apartment.
And downsizing to unlock a better life by the beach.
No regrets about moving into a tiny house. There's no room for excess or unnecessary objects.
That's all next on Unlocked.
This is Al Quoz, an industrial area now regarded as the centre of Dubai's art scene, home to multiple galleries, exhibition spaces and studios, including that of one of the city's most successful artists, Sasha Jaffrey. The art market can be unpredictable, so established artists like Sasha need to consider how they price and sell their works in order to sustain longevity and fund the creation of future collections.
I want to paint till the day I die. In order to do that, I need that steady progression where my work is going up in value every single year. What's important is it's this gradual little rise that can then keep going up its supply and demand. I purposely have 12 paintings released over a 2-year period. So I have maybe 150 people on a waiting list for those 12 paintings. And that keeps the interest in your work, which keeps the supply low and the demand much higher.
Some breaking news out of China, the PBOC cutting the loan prime rate this morning, and quite a surprise move for the markets. Once again, another unexpected piece of information that the markets will have to digest this morning. We are now looking at CNH, the offshore currency, pulling back slightly there, 7.29 against the US dollar. So we have had the 1 year, which most new and outstanding loans are based on, lowered from 3.35% to 3.45%. The other way around. And then the 5 year, which of course most of those mortgage rates are based on at 3.85 from 3.95. So both of them have actually got a 10 basis point cut. It did come off the back of a cut to the 7-day reverse repo rate as well, adjusted from 1.8% to 1.070%. And that was because the central bank did say they did want to strengthen counter-cyclical adjustments to better support the real economy. Of course, counter-cyclical referring to the PBOC's movements when it comes to lowering interest rates, and also on the fiscal side, we do see this as well, certainly to help the economy in the short term. So we have got some lines from the PBOC this morning. The move to lower the rates is to alleviate pressure on supply and demand of bonds in the market. The move is meant to increase the size of tradable bonds in the market and to also lower the collateral requirements of medium-term lending facility loans from July, because not entirely surprising that they have tinkered with the 7-day reverse repo rate, given that they had been signalling that they would do that as part of ways to manage liquidity at the short end, certainly as they have suggested that they will be borrowing and selling bonds, those longer durated ones as well. So we're going to be watching the market open and see what the reaction is to that this morning. But let's take a look at the Taiwanese markets, which have been open for a few minutes now. Emily, take it away.
Thanks a lot, Sam. A good 20 minutes that we've been trading in the Taiwan market, and we are seeing further downside. So extending on losses here, pulling back 1.6%. This is after the TAIEX shed 2.2% on Friday, more than 500 points. We had foreign institutional investors selling down this market, worth of shares 64 billion Taiwan dollars. Let's look at the heavyweights because TSMC, the other semiconductor stocks, continue to be a target. We've got to TSMC shares, they are trading below 1,000 Taiwan dollars per share. And if we do have those heavyweights, it will be worthwhile to look at those. And we're bringing it up for you. We can see TSM shares at 9.55 last traded. That is a pullback of 1.5%. So we continue to pull back or retreat from the record highs that we were at last week, over 1,055 Taiwan dollars per share. These are some of the heavyweights, and we are seeing downside come through here for MediaTek, down 2.4%. This company slapped with a Huawei lawsuit saying that there is little impact on its operations. It will not comment as legal proceedings have begun, but they have been accused of infringing on some Huawei patents to do with 5G cellular network communication technology. Let's flip over to the Taiwan dollar. We'll mention this just briefly here because it has fallen to a 8-year low against the greenback, the US dollar. TWD has lost 6% so far this year, as investors continue to move out of the Taiwan market, dragging with it the Taiwan dollar as well. So we're looking at a 32.76 last traded. Pulling up the Hong Kong market, coming online in the next 10 minutes or so. We do have an indication for the Hong Kong market to open firmer, better by 0.3%. We are going to be continuing to watch, of course, the impact on the China EV makers. Both Biden and Trump have indicated that they're going to be keeping Chinese-made EVs out of the U.S. market, be it 100% tariffs, be it 200% tariffs. But the likes of Xiaomi, which is the newest entrance to this market, has said that it was by chance that they got sanctioned by President Trump at the time in 2021 that they entered this market. So we are going to be watching out for Xiaomi, which we'll get back on this board a little bit later. They are eyeing big sales as they came into the market in April of this year. Back to you guys in Singapore.
Thanks very much for all that, Em. David Kuo is co-founder at The Smart Investor, joins us around the desk to make sense of what's happening in the China markets this morning. David, start from the top in terms of the LPR cut, 10 basis points. Is that enough?
Nowhere near.
Nowhere near enough. I mean, they don't seem to appreciate where the problem is. The problem is in the housing market, and they've got to address that. I mean, cutting the mortgage rates by 10 basis points is not really going to, well, it'll help homeowners at the margins, but it's not really going to solve the problem.
So how much do rates need to go down by for them to move the needle in terms of buyers being convinced that they need to step up or step in?
I think what they need to do is to actually have some kind of measures in which they can address the housing market seriously, because if you have an oversupply of property, you've got to actually clear that supply of property, that oversupply of property, before you can actually sort of stabilize the market. And we look month after month, we actually see house prices declining. I mean, you as a homeowner, I mean, are you going to be encouraged by that? By a 10 basis point cut? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I think the demand story very much speaks to how effective this interest rate cut perhaps will be, because, I mean, if you're worried about long-term income expectations, you're not really going to be likely to run out and get a loan just because we've seen a 10 basis point cut. But,
exactly.
I mean, what do you think the thinking is behind this? Because we know that the PBOC had said that the Fed really is a big constraint. They were really hanging in there for the Fed to blink first. There was an expectation that they wouldn't front run the Fed, and not just because of further depreciation pressure on the Chinese currency. We have seen a reaction offshore this morning, but also the pressure on NIMs too.
Yeah. I think, the Fed is probably going to move. I'm not a currency expert, and I'm not somebody who's going to say that the Fed is either going to cut this month or in September, but I think the signs are that Jerome Powell is cracking, right? He's cracking under some kind of pressure at the moment, and I have a feeling that he has no choice but to cut interest rates at some point, because you can see the trend is actually coming down. He seems to have changed his rhetoric from the Fed's target of 2% to at some point we will reach 2%. So his rhetoric has changed, and I think interest rates are going to come down. So maybe the PBOC isn't trying to front run the Fed, but what they're saying is they think the Fed is going to cut, and so we can afford to cut now. So that's what they're doing. But as far as whether that will help the Chinese economy, I can't see how it can. I mean, put yourself in the position of a Chinese homeowner. You see your property prices coming down, and okay, so the PBOC cuts the interest rates by 10 basis points. Is that going to give you a great deal of encouragement, especially when you see your kids haven't got a job? Yeah. Because, I mean, youth unemployment is still relatively high, and you think that's not really going to cut it.
The credit impulse is just not there.
I don't think so. Well, you hear it from so many companies that are telling you that people don't have that urge to go out and spend. I mean, you listen to companies like Starbucks telling you that coffee drinkers are not going into its stores and instead going for something cheaper.
And we know that the 5-year reference rate, for instance, the LPR, that actually doesn't take effect until probably next year. So that's not going to impact sort of mortgage holders right now. But do you think they've done this perhaps? David, we'll continue this conversation on why we think the PBOC has perhaps done this this morning. David Kuo, co-founder at Smart Investor, joining us around the desk. He does stay with us. Coming up, the Hong Kong and the mainland China markets will be coming online soon, and we'll get across the opening trades when Street Signs returns in 4.5 minutes.
I'm currently reintroducing my son to the best of 90s hip hop. And what I was always fascinated about is how a lot hip hop producers were using equipment in the studio in ways that they wasn't designed for. And I think kind of Gen AI is the same thing. Once you put it into the hands of creative people, we have no idea what they're going to come with.
Yeah, which is both a risk and an opportunity, right? Because I think if you look at waves of technology, it's always kind of like the technologist that has access to it at first, but you need like that kind of creative tension to actually get something good. There's always going to have to be that human element to things. And consumers are smart, right? They can spot something that isn't hand wrought. And those first waves, like we let the technologists handle it.
There's also something magical about like creativity. The greatest creative minds and the most creative people, there isn't some kind of linear equation that gets them to that. It's just magic.
Channel Japan, from the economy and technology to culture. Japan is fast becoming an international destination for travel, study, work, leisure, and living. What draws people to the country?
Biggest secret is Japan itself.
This country is so popular internationally is that anyone can enjoy it their own way.
Channel Japan, produced by Nikkei, the leading source for Japanese news and information.
See you next time.
Advertising and marketing navigates AI.
It'll probably put mediocre agencies out of business.
The creator economy.
We are growing faster in 24 than we grew in 23.
People do not want to be sold. They want realism versus idealism.
And politics.
It's your brand and my politics. And those two worlds have come together.
From his perspective, freedom of speech is more important than doing what advertisers tell him.
Marketing media money at Cannes Lions 2024.
We're moving from the autopilot era of AI to co-pilot era of AI.
We are just at the dawn of the robotics age.
The more experience you give it, the more capability this AI model can achieve.
Hopefully improves productivity, and it doesn't displace more jobs than it creates.
How to maintain our humanity if we live more and more digital lives.
The new era of tech on CNBC.
Ambition doesn't always look like you think it might look. I can remember reading The Economist on my lacrosse bus trips in college. I've just always been super fascinated by what's happening in financial markets and what is that telling us about where the world is going. I want to democratize access to that high-level information and help explain to every single person out there watching why what's happening in these complex markets matters for their lives today and in the future. That's what drives me. I love being part of this.
CNBC. Live ambitiously.